about carbon management and the framework to consider carbon collaboratively at every step for sustainable project delivery. I was about to give an introduction to for myself, but I think everybody knows me. This is quite fun. So can the presenters and panelists say a few words about yourself, please? Jonny, yeah, Jonny.
Jonny Breen with Mott McDonald, originally an architect, and I've been looking after the carbon quantification solution, the Mott Carbon Portal, on its rollout across New Zealand and helping people quantify and manage carbon in infrastructure.
John Bruce, please. John.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm John Bruce of Dita Consulting, and I've been with Dita for the last 4 years and had a real focus on decarbonisation of industry, really, and just sustainability opportunities for a variety of clients. With always starts with energy audits and carbon footprinting, but then that unlocks some opportunities that can be investigated to help people be more efficient, more productive with the energy that they're using, and then identify as part of that decarb pathway what some of the exciting projects are that we can support the development of, and look to project manage. So yeah, everything carbon, everything energy. That's me.
Chris.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Chris Bailey. I'm founder of Green Halo, which is a carbon accounting platform. I'm also a professional director, and Green Halo is actually a spin out of an IT company I part owned. And a long time ago, I gained a diploma in project management. So I think that helps to qualify me to be here today.
Right. So all of you have been, I think some of you have been in this dialogue session earlier. This is the 5th one. So the basic thing about this dialogue session is about sharing knowledge and ideas. So we have different, we're sharing perspectives and also experiences, and more importantly, is to share your challenges, because we are all working in this industry. So what we're going to do is for the session, we'll have the main speaker, John, speaking for 20 to 25 minutes, and followed by the panelists 5 minutes each, and then we'll continue with the dialogue which we started before the session. Okay, so now I'm just putting this 2 things which I wanted which I thought I'd gain from this session. So for me, it's basically I would like to know what are the benefits of carbon management, and I thought some people who might join in would also want to know that. But and also, what can I, the project manager, do to manage carbon in my projects? So these are the 2 things which hopefully I will learn something about it. So I'm expecting quite a rich dialogue among the few people who are very much in this line, and I will now welcome Jonny to start his presentation. Jonny, thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. So shows that. Will that appear okay?
Yes, please.
Cool. So, not making the presumption of anyone's background in carbon, I thought I was just going to do some context on greenhouse gases and why we talk about carbon so much, and then drill into a carbon management framework that is used specifically within the built environment and infrastructure, and how that's sort of delivering outcome, and then go answering the question, Brenda, like, why do this? So, with that said, greenhouse gases, there's a wide range of them, and these are 4 of the more common ones, and they all have different what's called global warming potential, and that is measured against the carbon warming potential of carbon. And we can see on the right hand side sort of the global greenhouse gas emissions, they're in our atmosphere, and carbon dioxide through the burning of fossil fuels is by and far the most. So to simplify this quite complex science, we often talk about carbon as a standard unit of measurement for the emission of greenhouse gases. So other greenhouse gases are equated to their carbon equivalent. So everything that we're doing, you'll tend to see CO2e, which is carbon dioxide equivalent, and that's sort of how we measure it. And this is getting extremely, critical for us to deal with. We're living and breathing the effects of climate change now, based in Auckland here, and we've had quite dramatic extreme weather events, but around the world, between the Paris Agreement, net zero legislation, climate emergencies, the numbers of countries and cities mandating or legislating carbon reduction to the pursuit of net zero, as well as some countries now starting to require the disclosure of embodied carbon in the built environment, specifically targeting the built environment space. But we can see sort of the rapid uptake of this, and this is quite clearly the key economic indicator for the 21st century, that carbon will become quite a piece. So how do you work it out? Well, it's actually really simple. Carbon is simply an activity multiplied by an emission factor, which tends to look like a 10 decimal point in coefficient. That is the carbon intensity of that activity, and that gives you the carbon footprint. It is literally that simple. Now, I'll drill into those three bits just to explain a little bit. So, like, activity is anything and everything we do and use. So it could be a kilowatt hour of your electricity, a liter of fuel, a cubic meter of concrete, a cubic meter of waste, air travel. Those are the activities that we do in our operations and our delivery. And each one of those activities has a relative emission factor for the carbon intensity of that activity. So these carbon factors come from a wide range of databases. So in the built environment space, specifically speaking about New Zealand, these tend to be the four primary ones that we'll use. So we have the Infrastructure Sustainability Council's New Zealand factors, which is largely for linear infrastructure. You have the Ministry for Environment, greenhouse gas emission factors, largely for operational organisation. And then you have the Building Research Association of New Zealand, and they're largely vertically focused. And then out there in the supply chain, locally and internationally, you have what's called environmental product declarations. And those are audited and certified carbon credentials of products and materials that are out there. So you've got your generic government and industry ones, and you also have some for specific products that have carbon credentials. So you take that activity and you multiply it by a factor, usually from one of these sources, and that will give you your carbon. And then when we're working in this space, you'll tend to hear of it broken down to lots of different metrics. So the one you'll probably hear the most is scope 1, 2, 3. This is driven by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. This has been sort of the global standard that everyone's aligned to in regards to how they quantify and classify and disclose their carbon. So scope 1 is direct emissions, scope 2 is indirect, and scope 3 is the emissions of others. But there's lots and lots of different ways of classifying it depending on which one you align with. So the typical standard for organizational reporting is that ISO 14064, and that simplifies it down to direct or indirect. Did you emit it or did someone else? But depending on whether you're dealing with national guidelines, so for example here, the Ministry for Environment's guidelines on emissions reporting, they have their own 6 categories or different frameworks. And what you end up with is all of these variants of how to consider carbon, CapEx, OpEx, upstream, downstream, direct, scope 1, 2, 3, the 6 categories of the MFE, and what they actually represent. But this highlighted area here in the middle is basically what I'm talking about in the built environment. So it tends to work from the capital carbon upstream by the supply chain, or scope 3 carbon for the embodied carbon materials. This tends to be the niche that we work out within the built environment space, as project managers and manufacturer designers and contractors. So that's sort of how you work out carbon and the different ways to classify it. But within our environment, we consider carbon across the life cycle of an asset. Whether you're doing a new build or a maintenance works, it's what is the carbon impact now and the carbon liabilities that exist in the future as a result of our choices now. So it's equated to our budgets. So when you have your CapEx budget for delivery, we call that capital carbon, which is the material use stage or product stage, depending on which one you like. So this thinks about everything from the extraction of the materials to the construction of it on site. And then once it's commissioned, you run into its long operational life. Could be 50 years or 100 years. and all of the emissions that relate to that operational phase. So everything from maintenance to energy use. And then once that useful stage is ended and the asset is decommissioned and demolished, the carbon liabilities that exist in the demolition and the disposal of those materials. So that's taking a particular asset, it's a building, a pipe, road, and looking at its carbon emissions now and long into the future so that you deliver a better outcome overall rather than creating consequences later through carbon savings in the earlier stage. And this is called a life cycle assessment, which is another ISO 14000 standard. And this is the direction of travel for a lot of, especially the Commonwealth countries. So we see this happening in the Building for Climate Change initiative within the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment here in New Zealand. And we're seeing it happening with Infrastructure Australia and Infrastructure New South Wales, especially over in the UK, that this life cycle assessment is the appropriate methodology for the built environment. Now, this is my oversimplified way of looking at it because it can get a little confusing. So when we hear about scope 1, 2, 3 and a greenhouse gas inventory, that is all emissions for a period in time. So that's everything from your fleet to your electricity use to the projects you build, etc. And that does it. But when we look at a project, it takes it and it looks at it over its life cycle. So you can see it's got its heavy scope 3 construction period. But once it gets commissioned, then you'll have the direct emissions from its use and its energy use. And this will vary depending on its maintenance cycles. And then eventually you'll demolish it. Contractors will come in and remove the asset 50 or 100 years from now. And that's how those two sort of frameworks line up with each other. They work on slightly different axes, where one looks at everything for a period of time, and this one looks at something over its life cycle. So with all that said, greenhouse gases and the carbon, where does project managers and carbon management come into this? So this was first assessed, and we had done a paper for the Treasury in 2013 called the Infrastructure Carbon Review. And they want to understand the role of infrastructure in the national emissions and what is being done about it. And this was in helping to respond to the Climate Change Act within the UK from 13 years ago. And it came up with this piece that carbon is a good proxy for resource efficiency, and those parties within a supply chain who are considering carbon in what they do are delivering lower cost outcomes. So through lower carbon isn't necessarily higher cost, it's better use of the resources that we have. And you had this headline that lower carbon is lower cost. That when we consider the need to build and the material and procurement and logistic choices of what we do, if we can optimize that, we can save money as well as carbon. Now, one of the observations and subsequent recommendations of the Infrastructure Carbon Review was there is pockets of excellence existing out there, but there is no means to connect a supply chain in dealing with this. So you may have a strong designer who considers this, but you may not have an asset owner receptive to understanding the challenges or the low carbon innovations brought forward by that designer. And this goes with contractors and manufacturers. So as a result of that recommendation, the publicly available specification 2080 was released first in 2016. It's had an update at the start of this year, the 2023 version 2 update. And this carbon management standard for the built environment, vertical and linear, takes a life cycle assessment approach for carbon across the life cycle of a project. And the key piece for this was it's a management framework designed to connect a value chain from a project to a program to an organization, so that every party across that value chain is empowered to consider and challenge carbon to find lower carbon outcomes, and for other people to be receptive of that. And this comes to everything from target setting through to quantification methods. And the headline graph, which is literally on the front page, has these very broad definitions for how it could be challenged at any piece in its operations or at any stage where there's avoiding the need for emissions. Do you need to build this asset, for example? Like, could you mitigate the need to even build this asset through recalibrating a system, for example, or looking at it in a different way? But if we're going to build something, could we assess alternative solutions that reduces the emissions? Value engineering, better methodologies, those sort of pieces. And lastly, where we're going to proceed with the project as intended, look at material substitution and optimizations that we can just improve how we currently operate. So this exists at any project or operation where we can avoid emissions, switch it for something better, or just simply improve how we currently work. And the way that it considers it is sort of across these members of a value chain. So everyone down from the product material manufacturer through to the contractors, designers, and the asset owners. And those are the parties subject and catered for within the POS 2080. So they each have their responsibility within this framework, but they obviously exist within the wider remit, which is regulation, government, and insurers who can't influence various parties in this. But the POS 2080 is very much thinking in a built environment space from an asset owner to the designer, to the contractor, to the manufacturer, and how they work together. Now, where they work varies. One of the 2023 updates was starting to consider this holistically within the network that an asset owner operates and the system that is the multiple networks from asset owners at a country level where the government will be involved with. So we can see where the 4 members of the value chain are considered at an asset level, but they have the ability to influence the asset owners and managers at a network level. And ultimately, you can also influence regulatory or legislative change at a system level. So where we look at this and what's within our direct control and what we can influence, this is considered so that where change could be affected by recalibrating a network to eliminate the need to build a particular asset, that should be considered and brought forward to an asset owner in this case. And this here is the simple one-page diagram for the carbon management process. So it starts on the left-hand side where you have the leadership of an organization in wanting to tackle carbon, and then you have target setting and baselines to understand current hotspots and where reduction can be achieved. And then from that, you run into this cycle, and this cycle exists at every work stage of a project. And this is where the project manager within a particular stage at any part of the value chain across the project lifecycle, this is the key piece here. So you first have the assessment of carbon. So you may have a baseline where they said this is where our carbon is. We would like to reduce that. It's assessing the different reduction opportunities that exist within a project. Then you have the monitoring and reporting of that. So as project managers, making sure that it is assessed and considered and challenged. And from that, then procurement is the greatest lever for doing this. Is the supply chain incentivized to consider carbon? And then when you have any feedback in achieving carbon reductions, it's feeding that back into project managers and the wider supply chain, so you have this continuous improvement and also the scaling of reductions that can be put from a project out to a program. And in the middle of all of that is integrating carbon into the decision making. So this is, put simply, quantification. Do people have the ability to understand the carbon of their decisions? And we do have, a range of carbon solutions out there, everything from a simple spreadsheet to a website to complicated carbon software. But it's making sure that everyone has the ability to consider the carbon implications of the decisions they're making. And once you have that leadership and you have it assessed and supported, then this is how we achieve decarbonization and cleans the conformity with carbon reporting, everything up to green bonds. Now, why do this? Well, as we've seen in the world map earlier, and we've just came out of COP28, this is a massive thing at a global scale, and that is coming down from everyone from the United Nations down to national legislation, to company mandates, to insurance and bank liabilities on financed emissions. It cascades right down. So this is the greenhouse gas emissions for New Zealand for the last 40 years. And we can see sort of the natural growth that's happened. And what we've done in a part of the COP process and the Paris Agreement was we have a national determined contribution. What are we going to reduce to help meet that 1.5 to 2 degrees beyond pre-industrial levels. And it is a 50% reduction on the 2005 baseline. So that was originally set as a 30% reduction. The Climate Change Commission came out and says, well, that's actually incompatible with the Paris Agreement to limit emissions. So it was ratcheted up just 2 years ago to a 50% reduction. But you can quite clearly see our trajectory and where we need to be. So the direction, the change of direction is going to be rather steep. Now, something that we have in effect now and continues to be used, by government and by industry is the emissions trading scheme. So this was New Zealand government's way of commercializing the removal of carbon within and beyond New Zealand shores so that they could put ultimately a price on carbon. And this is a market set price. So the chart on the bottom left is the price per a ton of carbon, which is 1 unit of the emissions trading scheme. And that's used by companies who want to offset the carbon by emitting 1 ton and purchasing an emission trading scheme and relinquishing that to say that they're offsetting. And this is starting to come into effect. So certain organizations who want to claim conformity with carbon neutrality or offset certain bad emissions will go and use ETS units, and this is the New Zealand way of doing it. But the difference between where we're at now and the target that we've set is quite stark. And the current direction of travel is that we will be buying offshore mitigation measures, which will be financed through the emission trading scheme by New Zealand and by organization. And the liabilities exist at a national level right down to an organization level is huge. It's absolutely enormous. So we know that we have to achieve net zero. We've legislated that. We know we live within this world that is changing dramatically. So certain organizations consider, well, what is the liabilities that we're existing on in a 2050 operating environment? Like if we build an inefficient plant now, what's going to be emissions in 27 years' time? And therefore, where will we sit relative to a net zero target, either within a city or a country or an organization? And ultimately, the difference between where you're at and where you need to be, this is where you have the liabilities that exist within carbon emissions, and the ETS sets that. So you can very quickly work out that price. In regards to, I guess, where we're going in the medium term, the Climate Change Commission had just came out with its new advice, neatly timed for new government on the direction of travel for policy. So we already have, ratchets up that have had carbon neutral government program by the 18 months time, by 2025. And you've also had the climate related financial risk disclosure, or TCFD, for the top 199 firms in New Zealand. And you also have things like Infrastructure Sustainability Council, or ISC, assessments on major projects across rail, water, and road and energy. So this is absolutely the direction of travel, and this is the ratcheting that we hear, that this will get increased over time, and this is where the Climate Change Commission has sort of advised the incoming government on what's the next steps to keep this momentum of change and try and meet our obligations that we committed to within the Paris Agreement and the COP process. So some, it's not all doom and gloom. This topic is quite daunting, but some useful context, the environment that we operate in. So this is the Climate Change Act, which committed us to net zero, brought into legislation 4 years ago. And this looks at the emissions emitted within New Zealand. But when we look at it at a project or an organizational level, you look at it in a slightly different way. And the sort of global standard of how we do that is the Science-Based Target Initiative, which is a conglomerate of everyone from United Nations to a range of working groups who define this. And they set certain principles around it. So it's all about rapid, deep emission cuts now. You can't have claims of net zero until targets are met, reduction of 90 to 95%. And the one that I thought I'd touch on was the difference between production and consumption emissions. So it gets into a small technicality, but it does matter because New Zealand's target, and for example, Auckland's target, where I'm based, is a production-based. The emissions released within the geographical area of someone, this is where they have reduction targets. But when we look at it from a project, especially from project managers, you actually look at it from a consumption-based. because of our remoteness and, where a lot of long lead time assets are manufactured internationally and brought across, we consider the carbon footprint of those assets being constructed in another country and transported to here. So we take a consumption lens, which is a much bigger, it starts to really, once you look at scope 3 and the upstream emissions from beyond New Zealand borders, it starts to get really, really large. So we take a consumption-based approach, which is slightly at odds with our production-based legislative net zero target, but where we can influence the behavior of others that we procure from and work with, this is where we start to achieve the carbon reduction outcomes that we want. So why do it? Well, it is the right thing to do, but there is lots of need. You have mandate. We're going to have the cost of carbon come in, which I mentioned around the ETS, the social license to operate, and the scrutiny applied on organizations or even projects, that don't achieve it. You'll see the ratcheting of climate change lawsuits to stop capital projects. They're not in line with legislative national targets. This is absolutely a mandate. So 2 takeaways, just to summarize, all of that, is the guidance document for PAS 2080 is free online. It's written by the infrastructure supply chain. It's written by contractors, project managers, designers, and manufacturers as guidance for themselves and their peers. So it's really extremely well written with case studies on how this is applied. I'd recommend giving it a read to see how this is actually being put into practice by people like yourselves. And the other one's enabling the measurement of carbon. So you can't measure or reduce what you don't measure. So enable carbon quantification. There is solutions out there. There's free solutions. There's solutions that can work across entire value chains for people to understand the carbon implications of the decisions they make in design or operation. Those would be the 2 key takeaways. And that is everything from me.
Thank you, Jonny. I mean, I have got a few questions which I'll ask later on, and I'm sure other members will also have. But then, so I think first we'll go to the panelists. John, Bruce, do you want to say? Did you want to start yours first, John?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. Thanks, Jonny. Like lots of great material there, and I'm just buzzing with questions myself at this point. But I suppose, just my reflection on sort of where I am in this space and working with different organizations and such like towards answering some of these questions is, it just feels like, I guess, on a global scale, we're at this really important point. We've got to make some big decisions going forward in terms of what technologies we want to use for power generation, for materials for buildings, and then all these different things. And you touched on it in that presentation, but that life cycle analysis is really so important, so that we're not just thinking about one particular aspect of the operation carbon utilization. It's actually that thing that's now operating, and maybe like say a solar panel, for example, like it has to come from somewhere, and there's raw materials extraction, and there's manufacturing processes and transport and shipping, and then there's the installation effort, and there's a lot of kind of foundations and whatever else that might go into that. But then and not too far in the distant future, there'll be a decommissioning campaign where the materials of the panels themselves have to go into some form of recycling or landfill, whatever it might be. And then the new product has to be built to replace it. And it's like, let's look at the life cycle of the technologies and the solutions that we're putting forward at this point, and then think about it in those terms so that we can compare, apples for apples as closely as we can. Obviously, there'll be lots of assumptions and things like this. So it does seem like, the conversation is going that way, which is great, but it does need to have more of a community, more of a network, sharing of knowledge, like these types of sessions that can encourage, because that capital carbon is something that feels very new in the conversation space to me. But that's great, because now it's a bit more familiar to more and more people. And just before we came into the session, we're talking about the operational viewpoint of, say, new technologies and new systems that are being introduced. That may result in a carbon saving versus the old system, but there is a cost of carbon that goes into actually building a new building envelope, introducing new technology, tying it all together. Like that all comes with some cost, which I guess is like in deficit until you've made those savings to use that better system. And so I think, yeah, that's those are all really vital considerations. And the likes of what the past 2080, I got that right, wasn't that 80-20? 20,
No,
yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah. What that brings is, yeah, like those frameworks, similar to the project manager's toolkit for sustainability that Parinda's worked really hard with to develop those frameworks so that we can actually have the conversation in a comparative way. And yeah, look, really glad to be part of the conversation and can't wait till question time because I've got a few lined up for you.
Yeah, okay. Well, I have a few questions for John as well. Okay. Okay. Shall we move to Chris, please?
Yeah, sure. Look, I want to start right back where Jonny began, which was all those carbon emissions that you talked about. And in practice, it's actually really difficult to try and measure those. And although you talked about some tools, from our own experience at Ember Technology, where we went net carbon zero in 2020 or started in 2020, we found it really time consuming and challenging and difficult. And so looking around at what the platforms out there are to help, I didn't come up with something that was going to work for us. And so we actually started building a platform for ourselves and only for ourselves. And had I known then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have gone any further. It's a beast, a juggernaut. So why don't I just share a little bit about Green Halo? Let's see if I can share screen here. Are you guys able to see that? I'm not sure that you are.
No,
we can't see it.
So, Prawindra, you need to allow me to share screen.
Yes, I think you can now.
Right. Here we go. Brilliant.
Still not there.
Coming through. Can you see that?
Yep.
No.
Yes, I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so Green Halo, you guys can all jump onto the website, greenhalo.nz. You can have a look at it, check it out. We're very transparent around how we operate, including the pricing. But what I was really going to show you and what you probably really want to see is how Green Halo works to save you time. I'm going to skip past the dashboard and go straight to emissions. So these are all the different emissions categories that you can set up for yourself, or there's some set up there for you. And if I jump to electricity, so this is obviously just a dummy company with dummy data. And I just want to, have a look at the graphs and things. That's pretty standard through lots of platforms. But what I wanted to show you is just how we're trying to automate that draw of data. So regarding electricity, you just put your meter number in and a couple of details, hit submit, and your electricity data will pull directly into Green Halo without you having to do anything. I'll give you another quick example, and this is probably a good one to showcase some different ways that we try and get information in. If you're using a fuel card, you can just follow some instructions with those companies, and again, it will pull that information in actually almost in real time. If you're not with them, but you've got an invoice coming in, you can drag and drop your invoice, and Green Halo will scan the invoice, suck out the data that's relevant to your carbon emissions and pop them into Green Halo for you. And then there's the good old Excel drag and drop, or you can do bulk uploads or use our template as well. So I guess the idea is to try and get that data in as efficiently as possible. I think it was Jonny also talked about targets as well. So I just thought I'd quickly show you. I'm just going to remove some of the target features. This is probably more at an organizational level, but it could be applied equally to a project where you can set a target really quickly and easily based on a baseline and a reduction by percentage or a particular target that you're going for. And then you can track, and in this case, it's not a great business. It's tracking over, but you can track how you're actually going against that target. And if you're doing a little bit of scenario planning, you could look at, if you don't get all the CapEx you want for your project, how that might look, or if you get everything and more, then what that would look like as well. And then there's no doubt you'll probably set some goals for your project as well. Really easy to add a goal. Just fill out the details there, and then Green Halo will pull that data directly and tell you whether you're on or off track. And if I just use air travel, the little bar on the right, the black bar, is actually looking really good. So someone's not flying quite as much as they used to. Reports, there's lots of different reports there. You've got visual ones, or actually I'll just quickly show you a visual one, or you've got accounting style reports depending on what your board or your project management office might be requiring. And just to give you a really quick idea, it's a bit like reading a financial statement where you've got your total carbon emissions compared to last month, compared to last year. And we actually talk in terms a wee bit to make it easy for people about how many trees are planted or removed, and what the equivalent would be if you're offsetting. So you can report by site and so on. And I know that I'm getting very short of time, so I'll just quickly show you the last feature tonight, which is around a dashboard. If you want to bring in all your suppliers who are on Green Halo, they could share their data with you, and you can actually look at all the combined emissions within those different organisations. So I think I'm out of time, 5 minutes up, and that's a quick snapshot of Green Halo.
Thank you for that. I'm sure others will have questions. Now, the idea of this dialogue session is also is like I say, is to bring in ideas of what people are doing actually, because all of us are doing something in the zone of government management. Now, I'd like to open up the floor, but first I'd like to ask if Jeff, who is one of the only listener, and Jeff has been involved in decarbonization. Jeff, do you have any questions, Jeff?
Yes, a couple of sort of basic questions for Jonny. Now, we've been working with ECA a lot. I think we've now got like 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 projects working with them through the Giddy Fund. Now, the one thing that we've spent some time is that the new government coming in is looking at ditching the Giddy Fund. So we managed to squeeze a couple of projects in under the beat the clock and got a couple of projects in, but we've been told there's no more coming in after this. Now, this was a very useful feature because one of the things that we've been focusing on is you put a couple of things, you avoid your costs, or you make things more efficient. But the one single thing that I've been able to take to our board is to actually sort of show that how saving energy or saving carbon CO2 can actually save money. So most of our projects we've been taking to the board have got about the best ones are about 2.5 year payback, but some of them are sort of as far as about a 5 or 6 year payback. Now, the other thing would be to try and tie it with financing organizations, and such that the funding or the payback of the project the amount that you're paying on the project basically is less than the amount of benefits you're getting from it. So there's been a couple of sort of things sort of on the financial side to try and take to the board to actually get there. So essentially they can look at it, they can say, actually, we're not going to be paying out any extra money over the period of time that we're building this and running these projects. But I've seen a lot of people doing projects, and for example, the one at Matara Milk, which I don't know if it's been in the news recently, they managed to push it through. And I know the project manager involved there. They pushed it through not because they had a payback, but because essentially the payback from them was not on the balance sheet at the bottom, but the fact that they would get recognized as a sort of carbon-free milk plant, and they could actually sell it. We're doing that as well, but so in the meat industry, let's say the margins are a lot tighter than they are in the milk industry, especially nowadays. And the issue has always been to sit there and say, well, so how can you make a plant more efficient? And And it actually became very interesting listening to that talk you gave, is that actually you look at every single stage. And the plus is building new plants that are more efficient and using a different way. And there's not always new technology.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just basically taking old technology that no one's bothered to use because it's just slightly more expensive.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
anyhow, but I mean, essentially, with the government as it is at the moment, you might find that the target for 2030 may no longer be 50%. Especially they've taken a lot of the subsidies, the incentives away.
Yeah, it would be remiss of them to be the first country to decline its NDC. Like at the minute, it's public knowledge that we will be paying a lot of carbon offsets to meet our target. We will meet our target, and we're basically sitting on a giant liability at the minute as a nation. So there will be potentially billions, at least millions, but billions of New Zealand taxpayer money paying for the offsets in other countries to offset our lack of fulfillment of our NDC. And this is something that everyone within the United Nations has contributed towards. So I would be very saddened if New Zealand went back on its commitment.
Well, I agree with you. I don't think they've got quite the same view. I'm not as optimistic as you, but anyway, I'll leave it there.
Okay.
I think one of the things you touched on there, Jeff, with the GIDI program in general, is that the funding has enabled quite a few different projects to be more economically favorable for the organization, and so therefore has brought them online where otherwise they may not have. And I think even that in itself, so even if the GIDI fund is now drying up and is no longer, other than the projects that have been approved, then hopefully what that does is that enables industry, not just I guess within New Zealand, but locally in Australia and wider field, to see these projects that have come online, the benefits of them. And then, as you touched on, enables maybe third-party investors to come in and maybe own the plant or the asset or whatever the new technology is, and provide some sort of like energy as a service or steam as a service type model approaches. And for their portfolio of investments, obviously makes a lot of sense to align with the sort of more sustainable and more energy efficient outcomes. And then therefore unlocks potential capital for organizations that are otherwise capital constrained. So hopefully, if anything, the GIDI program has enabled more of that to take place.
Yeah, you see, I'm actually I see a huge amount of benefit. I mean, essentially the sort of subsidy we're getting, which is typically somewhere between 25 to 45% of the value of the projects, has enabled us to actually to provide infrastructure that will actually save energy for many years. So it's not only cutting carbon, but it's actually providing a much sounder financial base for New Zealand industries going on. So while I see that they say buying an offsets from overseas, I actually think they really should be spent here.
I don't think anyone would do that.
Can I just open up the questions among the panelists? If I have a couple of questions, but I would like to give the panelists and the speakers some chance first. Anybody else has a question to each other?
There was something like that I think Jeff touched on there in terms of the NDCs, and just interested in your view on this, Jonny, in terms of those NDCs are or I suppose the emissions profile of New Zealand, heavy in the agriculture and so on. Like, how well do you think the built environment the capital carbon is actually captured within our current emissions profile?
I think it's pretty accurately captured in regards to at least the production-based emissions, because it is quite industry heavy between energy production and transport. Like that accounts for the vast majority, of our built environment emissions, and those are, quantitative measures that we know, the amount of fuel that we're bringing in, that's being burnt in vehicles. So I think it is well captured, and certainly the main operators of that infrastructure, from the airport to the transport agencies, the rail authorities to the largest utilities, have taken their role seriously, because you can see their footprint at a national scale, and you can see them bringing in carbon management frameworks or sustainability ratings on their projects. So yeah, they're visible, they're easily measurable, and the responsible parties now requiring the supply chain to help them reduce it. Because I guess the key one for and why this standard really exists is procurement and project managers hold all the levers in regards to achieving lower carbon outcomes, but ultimately the vast majority of the emissions don't exist within their organizational boundaries. They exist upstream in those servicing them, from building their assets to maintaining their assets. So how do they go and influence the supply chain? Please help us reduce our emissions profile. And that's where that carbon management framework is. You set the leadership, you set the target, you provide the baseline, and then you enable the quantification for people to bring low carbon solutions forward and challenge convention. Because why we do what we do is there's standards, and that and it works, and we need to do something a little bit different.
Could I change? Yeah, I was going to actually ask John a question just to bring you in, mate. And I'm going to bring it back to the project managers. How much does a project manager really need to understand about this at this point in time, and how do you think that's going to change over time?
Is that to John or Johnny, just to be clear?
That's for you, mate.
Yeah, cool. Look, I think that what you've touched on there is it can be a bit of a challenge. We've seen, I think one of the key attributes of projects, whether it's greenfield or brownfield, and we do a lot of work in the brownfield space, and trying to engage a project manager who's already got a project that is likely to have to fit in with some ridiculous schedule, some ridiculous budget. As soon as you start introducing additional sort of dimensions on the project management, unless that's driven from the top down early on and embedded as like a requirement of the project overall, there's no way you're going to have a project manager that's entertaining that conversation once he's kind of committed, he or she's committed to a scope, a budget, a timeline, these kind of things. So it needs to be as easy as possible, introduced as early as possible. And so the likes of like standard tools and templates for how you come about assessing carbon as a baseline to your project, and then having it as something that you can track and manage throughout that. It cannot be this additional task that's going to consume time and energy. It needs to be part of the process from the beginning, and that is a challenge. And there's definitely examples where that will have been successful, and there's no doubt examples of where that may have been tried to introduce at the beginning and has fallen apart throughout the process. The one thing that is encouraging is that there are more and more conversations around how that can work well. Personally,
so the second part of that question was like, in 10 years' time, how's this going to change? I mean, I'm just seeing such a rapid change at probably more your enterprise level C-suite, that understanding that they know that they have to do this. It's starting to become high on the board's agenda. In 10 years' time, what's a project manager going to need to know then?
I think one of the things that will help is the more you monitor and track, the more sort of foundational baseline information you have to then compare against. Because one of the things is like, well, what should the carbon budget of this project be? And it's like, if you haven't thought about that before, then you're almost starting from scratch. Whereas as you start to build up like an inventory of those data sets, then it all of a sudden becomes, oh, look, it's a water project of this particular value with this particular focus. Right, well, let's grab it from the inventory, and we know the baseline. So that is going to help, and certainly in 10 years' time, you would hope that that's a knowledge base that has grown.
Can I add to that question? Okay, Chris, the Crisis Council, we've been working on the sustainability issue for the last 6-7 years, and the pump station which you see behind was the whole of life cost and whole of life carbon was done 5 years ago, and okay, so we have already started on that path, and now we have, and also John was involved in the toolkit development, where we have done the carbon footprint for laying up pipes, laying up this. So we had done several examples which could be used, which could be replicated. The toolkit, the exercise of toolkit started about 2.5 years ago, which John was involved, and the toolkit not only talks about whole of life carbon, talks about other things as well, and other other sustainability issues. And now, one of the important thing in that when you did the carbon whole of life for the pump station over here, right from the initial stage, we went into findings, or doing a whole system analysis, and we have changed the pump, so it was a very good outcome actually at hardly any extra cost, because we found that the operation and maintenance carbon footprint was much higher. Now, I've been questioned about our calculation on that, but that's a separate topic. But we know that the operation and maintenance footprint is much more than the capital cost. Now, what happened after that? So I think John and we were involved in creating champions within the council of using this idea. So for the last 1.5 years, we did that. Not very successful. And our article appeared in the PMI.com about this toolkit and whole of life. And our toolkit has been now, which includes the whole of life carbon issues, has been circulated now into 12 countries already. It is a New Zealand production. That's only happened in the last 3 weeks. And just gone to 50 people right from Africa to India to Europe to UK so it has, it's going in slowly. And again, I think, as you said, the focus was on cost savings actually. Actually, all of us are talking about that. Yeah. It's about waste reduction. So we have now come to I think John will come to an assessment, is no matter how much the project managers knows, it is the higher up people having that saying we must do this, and part of our CCSAGs, our work will be going towards that level, because now I think we have the platform to show through Jonny's work, through all of our work, saying this is what can be done. The tools are there, the templates are there. Now you have to use it. So we are in that phase of now is on advocacy is our next goal. And so because you can't start advocacy without showing them how it can be done. So if I might answer you that. And I think, Jonny, you have this Mota tool, am I right?
Yeah, so like I was thinking about your question, Chris, in regards to what's project managers doing. So the Mott tool is used across a bunch of utilities and local governments here and government agencies in New Zealand. And what the project managers and the sustainability teams within those organizations simply check is, was it used? If that party's doing that project, did they assess carbon? Did they consider it? Because if they assessed it, they've at least made a carbon informed decision. It's when it hasn't been used and they maintain visibility on it, go, oh, well, how have you achieved our looked at our environmental outcomes policy and actually assessed carbon, because we can see that you haven't been into the carbon portal to assess this. And then they look at it. So where you get good leadership and stewardship by people who are taking this seriously is they understand the baseline. They go, so what would the carbon emissions be if we just did it traditionally? Then they go and look at, well, what has the designer suggested and where is that relative to the baseline? And that goes through every stage, so you can see what's the narrative from start to finish, that the end outcome relative to the initial baseline. And where thankfully a lot of the local suppliers have said, well, they just give the carbon portal to everyone, so the whole value chain, contractors, designers to manufacturers, are on it on behalf of that asset operator.
Yeah. So Chris, if I might add, because I'm in contact with the other PMI in the region, so the PMI Ireland and PMI France are quite in it, but I think we are a bit ahead of them actually, because through our toolkit, we're a bit ahead of them. So, but it will go very fast. Once you give the ideas, it'll go very fast. And so our toolkit has received quite good feedback. We talked about lifecycle carbon, but we didn't go into the depth of doing things. But we said this is something to be considered, and there are tools for that. So I'm quite positive that we have started. We were one of the people to start this thinking, relating carbon management to cost savings. Actually, as Jeff talked about in the cost savings. It's very clear, because we have shown that in our pump station. We have shown that in our other projects. that you can save costs. So it works both ways. So I'm quite positive, but I think there's a lot of work to be done on the senior level people to how do we communicate with them to show these benefits.
Yeah, well, look, can I just applaud what all of you guys are doing, and the resources that you've put together are fantastic. I'm on a half dozen boards, and there's not a board that I'm on that's not talking about this in some way, shape, or form. And it might be because it's a values decision and it's the right thing to do, or it might be that they've got a contract government and they know that government will want to know this. So I think, Prawindra, you'll see a rapid shift from the top, and I think that has started in the last few years. So keep up the great work.
Thank you. Okay. I want to ask John one question. John talked about, John, could you tell us about your experience on how, because you are actually doing this sort of things on carbon reduction. So John, can you tell us how you find your work? What are the barriers and what are the successes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of the projects that we're doing, they have a key focus on having some decarbonization outcome. So they're usually part of some organizations' decarbonization pathway, and that as a project in itself will need to have some sort of decent payback in order for it to get the approved capital. So the projects themselves are exciting, and I suppose they support the operational carbon footprint of the clients in a downward direction. But no one's focused on that cost of carbon to do the implementation. And so, like, internally, this is something that we would like to see included as part of the initial options assessment. And for some organizations more than others, that's something that they'd be interested in exploring. But it is really great to see some of these projects coming online with a real decarbonization focus, and whether that's fuel switching or just energy efficiency, or bringing in new technologies to manage waste in more sensible and sustainable ways. There's a variety of kind of projects. Jeff mentioned the biogas plants earlier, and with the sort of rollout of heat pumps across New Zealand and moving into Australia, these are real tangible projects that can have a real impact on reducing the coal consumption of these clients. So it's great to see that there's so many more things coming online that are practical, like alternatives to fossil fuels and such things on the energy efficiency side. And I could go into details on any particular projects, but please feel free to PM me for more info.
Okay, Jonny. So so we talked about having there is already fair good knowledge on how carbon can be measured, can be so. What is stopping and I think stopping this, or how can we make the leaders of companies and boards more focused on doing something about it?
This is the policy direction that the CCC are putting on government, and a lot of institutions are looking at it. When you look at the wider supply chain, the wider value chain within the PAS 2080 framework, when you look at the banks who finance it, to the insurance who insure it, to the governments that set the policy, it tends to be those at a higher level, nationally and internationally, that are pulling levers to incentivize or penalize when this isn't considered, because banks are liable to the emissions they finance through the mortgages or the loans that they get. The insurance is liable into the risks that they carry in regards to the adaptation and climate change impacts, and governments have set public commitments on the world stage with its peers, and we are a interconnected and New Zealand is absolutely interconnected and dependent upon the global economy. So every player at that higher level is saying this is important and pulling the levers that they can to force the senior people within a value chain to go, oh well, I'm in this, as Chris mentioned, the boards are considering this, you're now in this environment where your finance, your insurance, and your government are saying, we will mandate this on you. So we're actually leading the world in some spaces, like our TCFD mandate that came in this year for 200 firms has, ignited, an army of people to start to understand the climate risks that sit on their books and turn those into commercial ones. Yeah, like I think it's closing in on those people who the force change. So I don't think there's very many people, at that senior level who do not understand the new operating environment we're in the 21st century.
I mean, I may not agree with you on that totally, because as you know, our project, John knows, we were focused on the local government. And the reason why I focus on local government is there are hundreds of thousands of local governments around the world, and they're very similar. So, and I've dealt with local governments in Malaysia, Singapore, India, here. So but here I used to actually work in the local government, so I do understand exactly how it is. Very few on the high level people are as for now, and we've been they're more focused on the climate change, but of course the climate change is a different issue, but very much so. And I find that is the reason why I talk about local government is because local government does a lot of work which affects everybody. Parks, libraries, roading, and if local government starts talking more about it, everybody starts talking about it. Because we local governments, we had 600 projects every year, right, from airports to sewerage, so it's and we employ hundreds and hundreds of contractors and also consultants, so to get them thinking about it.
So can I ask a question of John and Jonny? So when you put your business cases up to the PMO or up even further, how prevalent is carbon in that business case summary on the front page?
That is the truth of it. So you as project managers or any business case, you have your typical time costs measures. It is rare to see carbon in there, but it's the stewards or the advocates of this that are starting to consider and bringing into their decision making. It might not be a headline figure, but it is in there. John, I don't know about you.
Different scenario so what I've seen in New Zealand and Australia. With New Zealand, well, I mean, I suppose with any business case, one of the things that outside of the sort of technology and the economic assessment, you want to maximize as many co-benefits that you can list in there as possible. And certainly, carbon emissions would probably top that list, certainly from any business case that we're involved in terms of the carbon benefit potential. That matters. I've seen to a lot of the companies that we're working with in New Zealand, and perhaps that's because they come to us, to try and voice those benefits. The conversation has been quite different in Australia, and to the degree where we have maybe had to reframe that somewhat more of a energy reducing or cost reducing dimension, if you like, rather than a carbon saving potential. But yeah, I guess it's a mix. Maybe I see more of an interest in that because of the companies coming to us and seeing that that's our focus. But regardless of what business case we put out there, we'd always try and bring in the carbon benefits as a co-benefit to the business case in general. But yeah, not always the priority of the project overall.
Yeah.
Okay. What I want to do is I know Christmas is coming and all of you would like to go back to your family very soon. So I'd just like to have from each of you maybe just one line statement, a very short statement on what you think you have gained from this small dialogue session. Jeff, could you start from this? Jeff, is there something new you've heard or something interesting you found?
I think this is the toolbox. I remember we first spoke about it some time ago, and quite coincidentally, we started working with the banks, and the banks are interested in a lot of it. So it's not exactly everything that you have in your toolbox, but there's quite a few of those items that were there. And after speaking, we've been sort of working on it, which was good, because essentially we start putting, so we're looking at water measurement, we're looking at water usage measurement, we're looking at waste and waste disposal, we're looking at such and such. And quite often what you find when you're doing the project is not only your carbon savings, it's also all the other sustainability sort of targets. The water landfill. I mean, the biogas project is we're talking about is we're tying in actually waste disposable from the local community as well. We're building a unit and helping the local councils get rid of some of their waste. Actually gives us actually additional fuel. And so it also ties into the community help. It ties into the water usage and water cleaning, the decarbonization. It gives us energy. Plus, what it does is it enables us to have high value sort of gas and stuff like that. So the whole thing would be not only just looking at the carbon savings, but I would suggest that maybe look at all the other sort of major sustainability issues as well. Because I mean, certainly the banks are basically working with pushing us to do that as well.
Yeah. So, sorry, Jonny, just for the, we were in contact with Jeff and John much earlier. So our sustainability toolkit looks at social, environmental, and economic. And within the environmental, the carbon footprint is only one of the items, but there are many other items. So in the council, we look at all the other items and like prioritize which ones are more important. Now, sometimes health and safety is more important than the carbon footprint because people have to, so we prioritize according, and that isn't in the council, is done in the business case. And so in the business case, council prioritize what are the KPIs, maybe 5 or 6, and carbon footprint always comes under one of them, but it may not be the highest depending upon the type of projects. Okay, sorry. Okay, John, what's your opinion, John? What did you think from this session? You have come up with some...
I think a couple of takeaways for me, just always on the sort of networking collaboration front. Like, so it's obviously great to be working with you, Brenda, and to meet Jonny and Chris and the like, who we can... Like, I see opportunity for future conversations, collaboration, and like learning from each other. And like, we're kind of doing this in our own time, and it makes sense. It's not necessarily about like the next job or anything like this. It's about learning the tools and the people who to speak to, and so we can be leaders in that space. But yeah, I always like, and I think I've heard it from you, Brenda, a few times in terms of the doing nothing case, like, you know, that first sustainability lens, and it was in Jonny's presentation as well. It's like, do we need to do this? You know, is there actually a way to be more efficient? We're all about energy efficiency, and often if you put that sustainability lens on it, then it allows you to step back a little bit and just rethink things. And it's such an important part of the process, and not to rush in, I suppose, to make those informed choices. So yeah, just great to be hearing more and more about that, and to be a part of this.
Yeah. I think, John, you've read the toolkit, because the first thing is refuse it. If you want to do something, refuse it first. And why do we want it? And then comes the question, because as soon as you start something, that's a carbon footprint. Anyway, Jonny, I know you were the main presenter. What do you think from the dialogue session? Have you any thoughts on this?
Yeah, look, I think it's about how do you take climate change down from United Nations to a local government, and how's it go? And it hasn't quite reached there from your experience and what you're saying. We can see the changes happening at central government levels, but it's hard it needs to go down to the next level to start to affect the local workforce, and have it considered at a micro level rather than a macro. So can see a gap there that I hope gets plugged. Yeah, and the other one's obviously the finance side of things. So if we know lower carbon is lower costs, and how do you actually check that is the outcome, rather than just incentivizing higher cost, more efficient solutions within an existing project, to try and make this stack up within, the normal operating model, without the likes of subsidies and well,
And Chris, any comments on your?
Yeah. So I can't believe how easy you've made it for a project manager watching this video conference to distinguish themselves in their career. So if they were interested and they took on those tools, they would have an immediate point of difference for their own career. So well done to all of you guys that have been involved.
Well, thank you, Chris. Chris, I think I think you have taken the words out of our toolkit, because we call this value. We said this this is the opportunity. Actually, one of the few opportunities has come up for a project manager to be something different. This is the point, and that's what we are communicating with our global project managers. Sustainable. I mean, of course we're talking about sustainability, but it includes carbon footprint. This is the time to say, let's look at the whole scenario and see what project managers can contribute from the whole of life perspective. So that's the so the objective is to actually to get people like you, and as John put it, to share and to communicate ideas, and hopefully like how we develop that toolkit. Maybe the next step, now I'm thinking, okay, Jonny, I'm thinking of the next step actually is I'm still on the local government line, is now the local government leaders are counselors, who are teachers, who are from different backgrounds, who probably do not have much idea about carbon footprint. So they are, and these people shape the council, and the frustration with the council staff is, hey, you elect people every 3 years who perhaps have very limited idea, and they're more interested on the street lightings, on the potholes and other things, and they spend a lot of time on that. So our next phase, John, which I was thinking, was how to now create this advocacy with that, understanding who the leaders are in the council. How can we communicate with them in a way that that meets their needs? For their needs are maybe ego, maybe something, I don't know what the needs are. But so that's our next level to target on, and hopefully some of you might want to get involved in that, and to share ideas of what can we do.